Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. I really appreciate you taking the time here on a Monday night, even if it's over Zoom, to come and learn together with me. It means a lot to have you all here. Raisi mentioned the Yankees and fishing, and my new wife. We'll see. I don't know how they connect to Elisha Ben Avuya. We'll see if we can do it. Um, I sent the sources to the chat. I don't know if people have access to them, but that's what I'll be basing the share off of if you have access. And if not, I'll be reading them all out loud. So um, there are a few stories in Chazal as haunting as the story of Elisha ben Avuya. He's a man who rose to the highest levels of Torah greatness. He's quoted in the Mishnah itself, as we will see. And yet he fell so far that the sages actually refused to call him by name. He became known simply as Acher, or the other. It's a chilling title, really, to be erased not only from the Beit Midrash, but even from your own identity, to become the other, as if the person you once were no longer exists. And yet the more we study his life, the more complicated it becomes. Was he a heretic? Yes. Was he broken? Almost certainly. But at the same time, he was a master of Torah, a man whose words are preserved for eternity in Pirkei Avot. Elisha ben Avuya forces us to confront some of the deeper questions of Elul. Namely, can a Jew ever be beyond Teshuva? Can Torah truth survive even when its teacher fails? And most painfully, how do we distinguish between the sinner we become and the self we are meant to be? And these are the questions I want to have throughout the night, and we're going to hopefully get to all of them. And it's with those questions that we turn to our first source, which is the Mishnah in Avot. We usually think of Elisha ben Avuya only in one way, as the tragic heretic, remembered forever as Acher, or the other. His very name becomes erased, replaced by a label of estrangement. Yet the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot records a teaching in his name, not in the name of Acher, but in the name of Elisha ben Avuya. This is source 1. It reads thusly. It's the first line, although I quoted the whole thing. It reads, Elisha ben Avuya Omer. Elisha ben Avuya used to say, Halomed Yeled Lemahu Doma. One who learns as a child, to what is he compared? L'diok suva al niyar chadash, to ink written upon a new sheet. Va'alomed zaken l'mahudoma, and one who learns as an old man, to what is he compared? L'diok suva al niyar machuk, to one who to ink written on a rubbed out sheet. And while the idea behind the teaching is not for tonight, it's not for tonight's shir. I do want to focus on the fact that he actually is quoted. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who redacted the Mishnah, had every reason to exclude Elisha's words. After all, as we will see, how can we quote Torah from a man who cut himself off from the Jewish people, who, as quoted in the Talmud, desecrated Shabbat publicly, who rode a horse past the Kodesh HaKadoshim on Yom Kippur? Wouldn't leaving his Torah in the Mishnah legitimize him? And yet, as we see, a Rebbe deliberately chose to preserve his teaching. What does that tell us? It tells us that his Torah was true regardless of his later fall. The wisdom he taught, comparing youthful learning to ink on fresh parchment, stands as Torah in its own right. Truth does not evaporate because the one who spoke it stumbled. There's something profoundly moving here. Elisha is remembered not only as Acher, but also as a Torah sage whose words have become part of the eternal tradition. His life may have ended up in tragedy, but his Torah remains immortal. What Rebbe seems to be telling us by including him in the Mishnah is to not erase the scholar because of his downfall, to distinguish between the man and the Torah, between his personal failures and the eternal truth he carried at one point in his life. And perhaps that is the very first lesson of Elul. When we look at ourselves, we are often overwhelmed by our failures, our mistakes, the moments we fell short. But the Torah inside us, the good we have done, the truths we have learned, that remains real and valid, even if the rest of us feels broken. Elisha ben Avuya really does remind us that a human being is more than his sins. And it's with that that I want to turn to source 2. These are we're going to read in source 2 the Babylonian Talmud when it comes to discussing Elisha ben Avuya, and then we're going to read the Jerusalem Talmud in source 3. And the shir is going to be based, obviously, off the interplay between the two stories and how they're represented. So this is source 2. This is the Babylonian Talmud Chagiga 15a. It says, Mahi. The Gemara asks, what is it that led him to his heresy? So the Gemara says, Chazam mitatron dis Yahava le Reshusa le Mesav le Michtav Zechusa di Yisrael. He saw the angel Mitatron, who was granted permission to sit and write the Zechusim, the merits of the Jewish people. Omar. He said, Gemiri de lamala lo havi lo yeshiva velo tachrot. There's a tradition that no one sits in heaven, no one turns his back, velo orif velo ifoy. No one turns his back on God. Nobody sits in heaven because God is there. So Shema Elisha ben Avuya, he questioned, Chas v'shalom shtei reshuyasein. Perhaps there are two people in charge, or two gods in the world. So the Gemara believes that this is what led Elisha ben Avuya to heresy. And the Gemara ends up of Kul Mitatron Umechuya Shisin Pulse Denura. They gave Mitatron, the person who was the angel that was sitting, 60 lashes. Amrule, my time chazise lakamta mikame. Why, they asked him, why didn't you stand up? The Gemara never gives an answer. Nevertheless, it's Yahava le Rishusa lemimchak zechusa da'acher. The Gemara records that they nevertheless gave this mitatron, this angel, the ability to remove the zechusim, the merits of acher. Now, notice how they changed, or they never said Elisha ben Avuya, but they're now calling him acher. Yatis baskol va'amra. So a baskol, a heavenly voice, rang out and said, "Shuvu banim shovavim," quoting the verse "Shuvu banim shovavim," which is a pasuk in Jeremiah, a verse in Jeremiah, which is that everyone has the ability. It's quoted basically in the idea that everyone has the ability to return, to do teshuvah, chutz me acher, except for acher. In that instant where Elisha ben Avuya sees the two people sitting, or the angel sitting in front of God, a theological misjudgment shattered his faith. His downfall began not in indulgence or neglect, but in a misreading of reality, an intellectual crisis that he could not overcome. And then rang out the most chilling note, a heavenly voice which declared, "Shuvu banim shovavim," return all rebellious children, except for Acher. Does somebody have a question? Or is that okay. So I want everyone to imagine the weight of such an announcement as if you were Elisha ben Avuya, to believe that the gates of repentance, which are open to all, have been closed to you alone. It is one thing to know that you have sinned. It is another to believe that God himself has given up on you. Here then we see the tragic turn in Elisha's life. It was not merely sin, but hopelessness. To believe that God himself had excluded him from Teshuva was to cut off the possibility of renewal. From that moment onward, according to the Gemara, he lived not as Elisha the sage, but as Acher the other, defined by his alienation rather than his belonging. The lesson is profound. The greatest danger is not failure, but despair. A sin can be healed through repentance. Error can be corrected through study. Even great intellectual crises can, with time and humility, be re-examined and repaired. But when a person convinces himself that he's beyond return, that the gates are open for all except for him, then he truly becomes the other. That is the voice we must resist, especially in Elul, the voice that whispers to us all that Teshuva is for others but not for me, that my mistakes are too deep, that my failures are too shameful. To silence that voice itself, I believe, is an act of Teshuva. To declare, no, the gates are open for me as well. That is to choose life, to reclaim one's place among the Banim Shovavim, the rebellious children who can always come home. I want to now compare that story in the Talmud, in the Babylonian Talmud, to the one found in the Jerusalem. This is source number 3. It reads, Amar Le. So the little bit of background is Reb Meir, the student of Elisha ben Avuya, is walking with Elisha ben Avuya, or now Acher, after he had become a heretic. So Amar Le, Elisha ben Avuya, or Acher, said to Rabbi Meir, Dayecha Meir, up until here, Ad Kan Tchum Shabbos. Stop. Up until here is the Tchum Shabbos, is the line, the 2,000 amot that one is allowed to walk outside one city on Shabbat. Amar Le, Minhain at Yodat. How do you know? Amar Le, so So Elisha ben Avuya said back to him, "Mitalfe desuse dehavina mani v'holech al payam ama." He said, I know. I can tell based on the horse's hooves that we have walked 2,000 amot. Amar le, he said to him, "V'chol adach chachmasa isbach, v'les ata chazarbach." So Rameir responded to Elisha ben Avuya. He said, "You have all this chachma. You can tell when when the tchum is, when we have gone 2,000 amot outside the city, and yet you haven't done teshuvah." Amar le. So he said back to him. Elisha ben Avuya said back to him, "Les ana yachil." It's tragic. He says, "I'm not able to." Amar le, so Meir said back to him, Lama, why not? Amar le, Elisha ben Avuya said back to him, or Acher said back to Rabbi Meir, Shapam achas ayisi over the base Kodesh HaKadoshim. Once I was walking in front of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, Rachuv al Susei b'Yom Kippurim, Shechol Yos b'Shabbos. I was riding on a donkey or horse on Yom Kippur, which happened to also be on Shabbos. V'shamati bat kol sheyotzes base Kodesh HaKadoshim v'omeres. I heard a heavenly voice ring out from the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the most holy place on earth. Shuva banim shovavim, the same verse from Jeremiah. Everyone is able to return. All children return. Chutz me Elisha ben Avuya, except for Elisha ben Avuya. And then I quote the end here to show that according to the Jerusalem, actually, Elisha ben Avuya actually did do Teshuvah. We could just read it quickly. La'achar yamim chala Elisha. After many days, Elisha became sick. Asun va'amrun l'Remeir, harabach ba'ish. That your Rebbe has basically fallen ill. Azobai mikvat rase v'ashkechei ba'ish. So he said. So he went and he found an Amarle. Lesatar chazarbach. Are you not doing teshuvah? Amarle. He said back to him. Ve'ein chozrin miskablim. He said to him, I will not be able to do teshuvah. Amarle velo kinksev tashuv enosh adaka. Rabbi responds, no, everyone is able to do teshuvah. Diachducha shalenefesh mekablin. That basically everyone is able to do teshuvah, even if he's about to die, even if there is a sword on his neck. But osa shah bacha Elisha v'niftar v'meis. At that moment, Elisha cried and he died. V'haya Remeir samach beliba v'omer doma shemituch teshuvah niftar Rebbe. He said, I am happy because it appears to me that my Rebbe, Elisha ben Avuya, did teshuvah at the end of his life. He saw it because he had cried. He had done teshuvah. The contrast with the Bavli is striking. There, the focus is on theological error. Here, it is on the existential despair. In both, the tragedy is the same. Elisha ben Avuya, or Acher, could not believe in his own capacity to return. And yet, in his final years, Rabbi Meir discerns a glimmer of hope that even the most alienated soul can find a path back at the very end. This is the enduring lesson of the Yerushalmi. So long as there is life, there is the possibility of teshuvah. No voice, not even one Elisha thought he had heard from heaven, can close that door, and no person may surrender to the conviction that he is beyond God's reach. I brought this as source 4. I just thought this was interesting. They've recently discovered, although this was from 2011, so I don't know how recent that is anymore. But they've recently discovered a rock near Lake Kinneret, which was inscribed with the word Shabbat, which was, they believe, used to show that in biblical times where the Techum, where the 2,000 Amot line was outside the cities. I don't have to read source 4 inside, but it's from the Jerusalem Post in 2011 where they discuss as much. I just want to focus on Elisha ben Avuya quickly, recognizing that up until here was the Techum of Shabbat, up until wherever that line was. And why is that discovery so poignant when it comes to the context of Elisha ben Avuya, the stone? Because in the Yerushalmi's account, Elisha, or Acher, even while riding a horse on Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, knew precisely where the Techum Shabbat ended. His rebellion did not erase his knowledge. Even as he distanced himself from the very community to which he once belonged, halacha still lived within him step by step, or one could even say hoofbeat by hoofbeat. And yet that knowledge was powerless to save him. He could calculate every boundary of halacha, but he could not convince himself that God's mercy had no boundary. He knew where the limits of Shabbat stood, but he believed that the gates of Teshuvah were closed. It's with this that I want to turn to Rabbi Solveichick, Joseph B. Solveichick's analysis of the two stories. He's the one who most concretely and poignantly puts the emphasis on the difference between the two stories and what we are supposed to take hashkafically from the two stories. This is source 5. I'll read out loud for anyone who doesn't have it. Again, it was in the chat. Do you think that Acher, he says, heard the heavenly voice well and understood it correctly? That voice that said, Shuva banim shovim chutz me'acher? God forbid. After all, how could a heavenly voice make a determination that contradicts a foundation of the Jewish faith, that even if one is a heretic all his life, if he repents in the end, he is forgiven? How is it possible that the heavenly voice could deprive the great Tana of this opportunity? There is something else he must ask, he says. If the heavenly voice did not want Acher to repent, it should not have connected with him in the first place. And even then, why did it begin with the demanding words, return, O backsliding children, shuvu banim shovavim chutz me'acher, and then conclude with the awful damnation of accept Acher? I believe, he says, that we can find the true intent of the heavenly voice by examining the different versions of the story as found in the Bavli and the Yerushalmi. And so we can ask, how in fact did the heavenly voice address the sinner? Did it call out to him using his real name, Elisha ben Avuya, or did it use his pseudonym, Acher? The answer is very simple. The enduring words, return, O backsliding children, were surely addressed to Elisha ben Avuya himself. It was he whom the heavenly voice pleaded with and sought to draw near, like a mother who always finds something positive in her child. However, the concluding phrase, except for Acher, was addressed to Acher. In this, he says, the Talmud Bavli records the correct version of the words of the heavenly voice, by which the Shekhinah sought to bring Elisha closer to herself by repulsing Acher. Why? Because the real Tana, who was a sage of Israel, who Rabbi, Yehuda Nasi, even quotes in Pirkei Avot, as we just saw, never sinned, never betrayed Knesset Yisrael, never identified with the Romans, and never sought to tear Jewish children away from the Torah and the fear of heaven. It was another person, namely Acher, who was the traitor. The Yerushalmi concludes the story with the words, he knew my power but rebelled against me. The Rav says, do you know why Elisha rebelled against the Creator, in spite of his greatness in Torah? Because he did not appreciate his own strength and thus betrayed God. It is as if to say, Elisha knew God's power, but he did not know his own power to overcome his outer Acher, and thus he turned away from God. His own weak self-awareness and his failure to know himself were the real cause of his tragic sin. I believe that this idea from the Rav is a profound psychological and spiritual insight. All of us, to some degree, live with duality. We have our truest selves, the self of faith, of yearning for God, and then we have the other selves that we accumulate along the way, the habits, the compromises, and the sins. Rav Solveichick names those other selves Acher. What was demanded of Elisha was not an impossible repentance, but the courage to make a separation, to recognize that Acher was not who he truly was. The tragedy is that he could not. He believed so deeply with the sins he had committed that the mistakes that defined him, that he believed that he himself was excluded. In his ears, the words except for Acher became except for Elisha. And this, the Rav suggests, is the essence of Teshuva, the ability to disassociate from the Acher within us, to believe that my sins are not my essence, to affirm that who I truly am, the Elisha inside, remains capable of return. This is not easy. I myself know it requires a deep kind of self-knowledge, the courage to say, yes, I have sinned, but those sins do not define me. They are real, but they are not me. Elisha ben Avuya's tragedy is that he could not separate the two. He thought that Acher and Elisha were one, and so he despaired. But in fact, the Bat Kol was saying something precisely the opposite, something which was precisely the opposite. Elisha, come home, only Acher cannot return. But you are not Acher, you are more than your failures. So the story of Elisha ben Avuya, in essence, is not merely a warning about heresy or rebellion, it is also a mirror. It forces us to ask, do we know how to distinguish between the Acher within us and our true selves, or have we too begun to confuse the two? I quote in source 6, This is A Driven Leaf by Milton Steinberg, or by Milton Steinberg, some of you may know. He basically has this book where he has his own interpretation of the story of Elisha ben Avuya, and I just thought it was interesting to quote it just to see where his mind was at, as they say, on the story. And this is source 6. This is in his interpretation. He says, "No," Elisha said warily, "it's not too late. How could I live where I am so hated? I am shut off from returning, as though a voice from heaven had proclaimed, 'All may repent, save only Elisha, the son of Avuya.'" "But Master," Meir pleaded, "back there is all that you have failed to find, a faith, a God." "Yes," Elisha said reflectively, "and no. It is true that I seek, and I have always sought, what they have in the city yonder. That is the fantastic, intolerable paradox of my life, that I have gone questing for what I possessed initially, a belief to invest my days with dignity and meaning, a pattern of behavior through which man might most articulately express his devotion to his fellows. In a sense, it has all been a long, arduous journey in a circle whereby I have returned to my point of departure, and yet I may not enter. For those who live there insist, at least in our generation, on the total acceptance without reservation of the revealed religion, and I cannot surrender the liberty of my mind to any authority. Free reason, my son, is a heady wine. It has failed to sustain my heart, but having drunk of it, I can never be content with the less fiery draught." This is Steinberg's tragic portrait, namely a man who yearns for the certainty of God, but persuades himself it is too late. His intellect will not let him rest, yet his faith feels beyond reach. His words dramatize Elisha ben Avuya as the man who confused Acher with Elisha, who mistook despair for destiny, who could not imagine that his true self was still wanting or waiting to return. What Steinberg captures so poignantly, I believe, is that the inner Elisha still longs for God. You can hear it in every line of this passage. He circles back again and again to the language of faith, meaning, and purpose. He cannot stop searching. He cannot silence the yearning, even as he insists to Rabbi that return is impossible. That is the paradox, and that is the tragedy. The Elisha within still cries out, according to Rabbi Steinberg, but he himself cannot recognize it. I want to turn to source 7 quickly. I just thought this was interesting. This is from Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. He's talking about in this part what it means to be able to choose, what we know as Bechira Chavshit. The two quotes that I put in here, that man does not simply exist, but always decides what his existence will be, what he will become the next moment. By the same token, every human being has the freedom to change at any instant. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's way. Seen through this lens, the tragedy of Elisha ben Avuya comes into sharper focus. His failure was not only that he sinned or that he even became a heretic, but that he relinquished his ability to choose again. When he heard the heavenly voice declare, "Shuvu banim shovavim chutz me'acher," he concluded that the gates were closed to him, that no choice could undo what he had done. But this conclusion was itself the great error. As Frankel insists, the one freedom that can never be taken from a human being is the ability to choose a new path, to redefine oneself, even in the darkest circumstances. Elisha's tragedy was existential, not merely theological. He surrendered the last of the human freedoms and thus locked himself in the very prison that Teshuva was meant to break open. Elul calls upon us to do the exact opposite, to refuse to give up our power to choose, to insist that we are not trapped by habit or identity. There are areas where each of us has quietly concluded, this is just who I am, I cannot change. Elul comes to shatter that illusion. In this season, or in this month, we are asked to reclaim our capacity for decision, to take one area of life and say, this I can do differently. This I can renew. Each act of Teshuva, however small, a single prayer, whatever it is, a single prayer said with kavanah, one moment of restraint, is a declaration that we have not given up on our freedom to choose. When we string together these choices day after day, we arrive at Rosh Hashanah as a genuinely new person ready to stand before God, not as the self we were, but as the self we have chosen to become. I want to turn now to source 8, which is the end of, in the Babylonian Talmud, the end of the story of Elisha ben Avuya. And the background for this is the Gemara is questioning, how could Rabbi Meir, how could Elisha ben Avuya or Acher's Talmud, his student, have learned Torah from him? How is that possible? He was now a heretic who was riding horses past the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the holiest place on earth, on Yom Kippur, which was also Shabbat. It's incredible. You have so many things where he seems to be directly refusing to obey God. And this is source 8. It reads, Ki asa Rav Dimi. When Rav Dimi came, it's from Eretz Yisrael. Amar, he said, Amri b'ma'arava, they say in the west, meaning Eretz Yisrael, Reb Meir achal tachla. Why was Reb Meir able to learn from his Rebbe, from his teacher, from Elisha ben Avuya? Because he ate a date, v'shada shechla lebara, and he threw the nut away, the innards away. Ashkachei, the Gemara says, Rabbi Bar Shila Elio, Rabbi Bar Shila found Elio, the Navi, the prophet. Amar le, he said to him, Maika Avid HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what is HaKadosh Baruch Hu? What is God doing right now? Amar le. So he responded, Ka'amar shmaita mipumayu dekulu rabbanon. He is repeating, God is repeating the words of our sages, of all our sages, except for one. Umipumayu de Rabbi Meir lo ka'amar. From the mouth of Rabbi Meir, he is not saying anything. Amar le. So he responded to Elio, Amai, why is that so? Mishum de kagamar shamata mipumei da'acher. So he responds, because he had repeated, he had learned words, his Torah, from the mouth of Acher. Amar le Amai. So he responded, why should he be judged unfavorably for that? Why? And he says, Rabbi Meir Rimon Matzah, Rabbi Meir found a pomegranate, Tocho Achal. He ate its contents, Klipaso Zarak, he threw away the peel. And the Gemara concludes, I didn't quote it here, but the Gemara concludes that God has found solace in his defense and thus quoted Rabbi Meir in the future. What is striking to me about this Gemara is that it not only mentions the metaphors of the fruit, the pit, and the peel, but the progression of Rabbi Meir himself. At first we are told he, quote, ate the pit, or ate the fruit and threw away the pit. That is, he tried to preserve what was nourishing while discarding what was inedible at the core. But the heavenly court was not satisfied with this argument. As the Gemara tells us, God himself would not cite Torah in Rabbi Meir's name because it was tainted by its association with Acher. Only when Rabbi Bar Shila defended him with the language of the pomegranate that Rabbi Meir, quote, ate the fruit and discarded the peel. That was when his Torah was accepted in heaven. It was my grandfather, I remember hearing this from him, pointed out what had changed. Right? Who cares whether the metaphor is he ate the fruit and threw away the pit, or he ate the fruit and threw away the peel? Why does the defense change? He pointed out, he thinks the answer is subtle but profound. To throw away the pit is to say the essence itself is compromised, but perhaps there is still something sweet around it. That is the theology of ambivalence, of being able to salvage parts of partial salvage. But to throw away the peel is to say the opposite, to say that the essence remains pure and good, only the exterior must be stripped away. That is the theology of hope, of inner redemption. In other words, my grandfather suggested that Rabbi Meir's Torah could only be accepted in heaven once he himself adopted the right stance towards his teacher. It was not enough for Rabbi Meir to learn Elisha's Torah while assuming that the essence was tainted. Only when he recognized that the core was still good, that Acher was only a peel covering over Elisha, could his Torah be spoken by God himself. And this detail, I believe, is crucial for our understanding of Elisha ben Avuya and his story. It tells us that in heaven, the debate over his legacy was not just about his failures, but about whether anyone could still see the true Elisha ben Avuya, the true Elisha beneath the Acher. Rabbi Meir's shift from pit to peel becomes the very condition for his Torah being validated. I quote here in source 9, this is the end of the Rav Solveichick piece on Elisha ben Avuya, but I thought it was important to bring later to really hammer home the point of what was going on with Elisha and Acher. Who was Elisha? Was Elisha Acher? Were they two different identities at the same time? Was one following after the other? How are we to view it? And this is source 9. This is Rav Solveichick later in that piece. He says, moreover, upon careful examination, it becomes clear that the betrayal occurred in a remarkable way. One morning, an alien soul, he says, this is Rabbi Solveichick's language, insinuated itself into Elisha, convincing him that he was not really a student of the sages, of the Misorah, that Knesset Yisrael was not his mother, and that its future was not his future. Suddenly, Elisha the Tana was displaced by Acher, and it was Acher who deserted the Beit Midrash, produced heretical works, desecrated the Shabbat, and rejected everything holy and precious. All the while, the real Elisha remained hidden in the depths of his personality, an Elisha who never betrayed God or the Jewish people, but was a hostage of his pseudo-personality that was Acher. The Rav's insight transforms the story from one of finality into one of hope, I believe. Even in the darkest rebellion, even when a person appears alienated beyond return, there remains a self within, a true Elisha that God has never abandoned. The task of Teshuva is to peel away the Acher and rediscover the self that still belongs. And so I now want to turn to source number 10. This is Rabbi Sachs, who is also discussing the idea of Bechira Chavshit, of freedom of choice. But he brings up Elisha ben Avuya, he discusses it, and I think this idea too is evident in Rabbi Sachs's words. Rabbi Sachs writes, this is source 10. Are we meant to believe, Rabbi Sachs says, that Elisha is telling the truth, that in fact he has received the heavenly no? That's how he puts it, that he has received the heavenly no. True or false, Elisha ben Avuya is saying what he wants to believe, that he is helpless, that he cannot turn, for the gates have been locked against him. This is a classic paradox of wish fulfillment, a self-justifying prophecy. If we believe that we cannot change, then we never will. We will be proved correct, but it was not true. Rabbi Sachs says that what gives the story its mythic power is that there is something of Elisha ben Avuya in all of us. We acknowledge that in some abstract sense, people can change, but that for us always turns out to be someone else. We always say, I am not like that. I cannot change. This is the Elisha ben Avuya complex, the voice which says that the gates are open, but not for us. And having heard Rabbi Sachs's words, we see how he reframes the entire story of Elisha ben Avuya. The tragedy he teaches was not that heaven had shut the door, but that Elisha himself believed the door was closed. He had convinced himself that Teshuvah was possible for others, but not for him. That conviction became his prison. Rabbi Sachs is reminding us that this is one of the most dangerous illusions a human being can fall into. The belief that, quote, I cannot change becomes fulfilling. Once we accept the despair, we stop trying, and the possibility of Teshuvah slips away. Not because God has refused us, although we may prefer to believe that, but because we have refused ourselves. And here we return to the theme that has run through all of our sources, namely, that the distinction between Elisha and Acher, between the fruit and the peel, between the true self and the alien persona, as Rabbi Solveichick put it, Elisha's tragedy is that he no longer believed such a distinction existed. Rabbi Meir saw it, Rabbi Solveichick saw it, Rabbi Sachs saw it. Within every human being, there is a voice of despair, an inner Acher, but also an inner Elisha that remains unbroken. Rabbi Sachs challenges us to confront that voice honestly in Elul. Each of us carries an Acher, habits we can't seem to break, and mistakes that we seem to make constantly every single day without fail. But the task of Teshuvah is not to erase the past. It is to affirm that beneath it all, there is still a self capable of return. The gates are not closed, and in reality, they never were. I want to turn now to the last source, to source 11. If I would ask any one of you, what is the idea behind the shofar? Is the shofar for us or is the shofar for God? Well, the correct answer is it seems to be both. We say, and this is source 11, I just brought the bracha, I quoted the bracha. It's Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kedishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lishmoa kol shofar. That God has commanded us to hear the sound of the shofar. So seemingly, it is on us to hear the shofar, to internalize the sound of the shofar. On the other hand, we say on Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah throughout the Aseret Yimei Teshuva, and this is just one case, but we say it many different times, many different ways. We say, Ki ata shomea kol shofar, umazin teruah ve'ein domalach. That for you, God, hear the sound of the shofar, and you hear the sound of the teruah, and there's no one compared to you. It seems throughout our prayers that the shofar, the sound of the call, the clarion call of the shofar is for God. So which one is it? It was my grandfather who suggested, I once heard this, that the answer is both. The shofar actually has a double audience. On the one hand, it penetrates our own hearts, reminding us of who we truly are. On the other hand, it rises upward as if to say to God, look past all of our failures, past the acher, and see the inner Elisha that still remains. This idea, I believe, brings the entire story of Elisha ben Avuya into focus. He could not believe in his own inner self. He thought that Acher and Elisha were one and the same. They were the same personality. And so he despaired. Rabbi insisted that the fruit was still there. Rabbi Solveichick believed the fruit was still there. And Rabbi Sachs believed that the fruit was still there. The shofar ties it all together. When we hear it, we are called to remember. Beneath our outer layers, there is still an Elisha inside of us, and a self that can return. And when God hears it, he is called to see that same inner self, to recognize the soul that remains loyal even when clouded by sin. Thus, this is the message of the entire process of Teshuva and the message of Elisha ben Avuya's story, to never confuse the Acher with the Elisha, to never believe the gates are closed. The shofar's call declares otherwise to us and to God alike. Elisha ben Avuya is thus remembered by our history as Acher, the other, the heretic, the one who fell to the side. But if we look more carefully, I believe through the eyes of Rabbi, through the insight of Solveichick, through the voice of Rabbi Sachs, we see an entirely different story. We see that within every Acher there remains an Elisha. Within every human being there is a truer self, often hidden, sometimes hostage to failure, that can never be erased. The tragedy of Elisha ben Avuya, thus, was not that heaven had closed the gates, it was that he believed that they were closed, and so he never stepped through them. He taught that his sins were his essence, that Acher and Elisha were one. But the truth, I believe, as our tradition insists again and again, is that the fruit is not the peel, the inner self is not the outer shells, the shell, and the gates of Teshuvah stand open until one does Teshuvah, as we see from the Yerushalmi. This is why the shofar speaks both to us and to God. To us, it is a call to remember the Elisha within ourselves, to strip away the voices of despair, and to rediscover who we truly are. And to God, it is a plea to see past our failures, to hear the cry of our soul, and to recognize the enduring self that remains loyal even when we choose to hide it. As we approach Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the story of Elisha ben Avuya presses a question on each of us. Will we allow our own Acher to define us, or will we return as Elisha? The shofar reminds us that no one is ever, quote, the other. Each of us carries a voice that God longs to hear. Each of us has a self that can return. And so may we have the strength this Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah to silence the voice of despair, to hear the call of the shofar, and to let God see and to let ourselves see the inner Elisha ben Avuya that still lives within us all. Thank you so much for coming, and everyone should have a great night and a great week, and I hope to see you all on Yom Kippur.